So more and more of companies are switching over to digital advertising because it's measurable, and that makes a lot of sense. But one of the biggest mistakes that we see is that people assume that it's trackable, and by default, that's not necessarily true. In fact, without setting campaign parameters through a URL, a lot of times the tracking is lost or it's completely unorganized. So in our latest episode in our Impact Analytic Series, I'm going to teach you how to create campaign URLs so that every single channel can be organized and tracked in a way that you want to be able to see it, and ultimately that you're going to be able to measure that performance. So stay tuned, and we're going to go over that right now.
Okay, so let's dive into creating campaign URLs. And remember, there's two reasons why we want to do this. First, we want to be able to track channels that aren't native to Google, and the only channel that's native to Google is their properties like Google Ads, Google Search, and Display 360. So in this case, we want to track channels like Instagram, Facebook, newsletters, Pinterest, Twitter, any of those types of channels. That's going to be important to track. But we want to make sure, and for the second reason why I want to use a URL, campaign URL, is because it needs to be organized correctly within Google Analytics and make it really easy for us to see the data. Now, by default, that won't happen, so campaign URLs are actually going to help us keep it all nice and organized so we can actually make decisions based on the data. Okay, so what I have here is the campaign URL builder that's provided by Google. So you can just do a quick search on Google, and this is going to come right up. You're going to insert your website URL. Now your campaign source. So your source, again, that's going to be Google or email or newsletter or Twitter or Pinterest, whatever it might be. That's your source. Medium. Basically, it's kind of like the ad format, right? So if it's a newsletter, it's a banner ad, it's a carousel ad, and then the campaign name. So, from an organization standpoint, what this looks like is you can drill down into email. You might have a newsletter, and you might have a weekly update. And then within those mediums, right, those can have two different mediums within that source. You might have separate campaigns that are within that those mediums, right? So you could have July 1 content, July 14th content, whatever it might be. So that's how you're going to differentiate it. What I will say is this: when you start building out URL parameters to track, you want to make sure that you have a standard way of having your source names, your medium names, and then eventually when the campaign name is going to probably change, but your source and medium, you have to keep them the same. So what I actually recommend doing, and I'm going to put a link of this in our video, you can download basically our campaign URLs. And what you do is I recommend that for Facebook, you standardize your name. So in this case, I'm using Facebook_CPC. And so that means that every time I create a campaign URL for Facebook, I want it to be exactly the same. That way the information is all organized, so when I look at it over months or over years, it's going to be really easy to see within Google Analytics. For my emails, you see right here, my source is newsletter and my medium is email. That's just how I have it set up. So that's what I'm going to use consistently. I'm going to use the same spelling and it's not going to deviate, or else, again, data is going to end up in different spots. So definitely use a document like this to record. Again, to have your source and medium pretty standardized, and then your campaigns, what I like to do is I like to track everything just so I have a record of everything and I can see what each URL correlates to the campaign that I've created. So that's what I've done. And then when you create this, so for instance, I'm going to track my email. This is actually going to spit out your URL, and where you want to put this is, and I'm going to go into constant contact, right? So I have an email right here. Where you want to put this is anywhere that links from the email out to your website. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and copy this. We actually already sent out this email. And now anywhere that's clickable, again, I want to change this out with this campaign URL. So in this case, I'm going to do the link, and I'm going to add it at the end. All right, and now what it's going to do, it's going to tell the system, so when a user clicks on this link and goes throughout the rest of the website, it's going to know that the source of that if they make a conversion, it's going to come from this email, which is super important, right? And now let's look at this when it's rolled up in analytics. So in this case, I have all my channels here. I'm going to take a look at email, right? I'm going to look at medium, and let's just see it all come together now, right? So it's all under email. These are actually all different landing pages because these are the amount of instances I use them in. And then let's check it out. Campaign, should say July, something along those lines, right? July, right? So now this is, I know all this came from here, and now I can look at my revenue. So this email actually drove almost $5,000 worth of revenue. You can see, which links were the most profitable and reorganize that. So it's really nice and neatly created, and it's really great to roll that up. If you're looking to do something, again, a little bit more advanced, I would say you can change out the content ID, the campaign terms, right? So this might be keywords. It might be dynamic, right? So sometimes these things can be changed out and make them dynamic. So on Facebook's end, for instance, I'm going to go into Facebook, right? Let's see what's going to come up. Probably only have one window open up when I do this, but for instance, like I said, I was using Facebook CPC as my source. My medium, I'm actually making dynamic. So I'm using something called adset.id, same with the campaign name. So this dynamically changes out. And I'm not going to go that in this tutorial, and I'm going to have another one on value track parameters on how to do this. But what you do have to know is that my source is always the same, and that's what I meant. You want to really make a standardization when you're creating sources. So Facebook-CPC, that's going to fall under paid social, right? And that's custom. So right now, by default, you're only doing social, but in this case, on mine, I actually built out a paid social channel so I can actually see from a high level what paid social actually brought in. Right, now I can see Facebook CPC and the amount of revenue that it directly brought in. Now don't get this confused with, maybe somebody saw Facebook first and then they clicked away and then they got here from a Google ad. This is just direct last click attribution. So yeah, so this is a tutorial basically on campaign URLs, why you want to use them. I definitely, you're definitely going to want to make sure that you check out some of the other tutorials, especially on value track parameters and doing dynamic parameters, who can make your life a little bit more easier. But again, there's two things that you have to take from this video. The first is you want to have a standardization and document that, right? And we did that in our document guide over here so that we always follow it and that everyone in your team follows it. And the second thing that you want to do is make sure that you have campaign URLs for any of the non-Google owned properties within Google Analytics. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, et cetera, so that way you're going to be able to actually track revenue per channel per ad. I mean, you can get that granular. So hope this helps, and stay tuned for more episodes on the Google Impact Analytics series. Have a good one, guys.